there guys, and welcome to the Creative Venture podcast. Firstly, welcome back after me taking a short break. I'm going to be changing a few things on the podcast, which I'll tell you about in an upcoming episode. Today, I'm talking to Jay Riley, a multi-instrumentalist, educator, and composer. Jay's music career has seen him tour across various European countries and into the Midwest of the USA. He's played for dignitaries at the Foreign Office in Westminster and at the London 2012 Olympics, to name a few. He manages a jazz club and does loads of work with charities and festivals developing young musicians. So I have a really honest chat with Jay, who's growth-minded, but also recounts the steps that have got him to where he is today. In this episode, we deep dive on fear, learning styles, and how success should be defined by you.
I think you can choose what success is. It'd be nice if everything took off and I was busier and doing bigger gigs. But actually, I'm in a situation where I get loads of time with my family, I get to perform, I get to do all the things that I want to do. So I feel like I'm successful for that.
Jay Riley, it's
Hello.
great to be with you, and thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
That's great. Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
No, you're very welcome. I do hear that you're an enthusiast of podcasts, so I hope this lives up to expectations.
I do listen to, a few podcasts. Yeah, I quite like Tim Ferriss. I listen to a lot of that.
Oh, yeah. There's a few Tim Ferriss-inspired questions that might appear in the podcast, so
yeah,
what a legend. There's such a great guy.
It's good, yeah. I mean, he sort of came from not very much at all, but he's got that sort of way of thinking, hasn't he? Which, resonates with me. And some interesting people on there as well. It's cool.
Well, it's similar to the topics we discuss on this podcast, really, where creatives tell us their stories about how various soft skills and strategies have helped them in their life and their career. And I'd love this to give the message that you can come from anywhere and go on to do anything. Because I think you're very much on the right sort of path once you've nailed some of this mindset stuff, which I think is very much your story as well. So I guess we'll dive straight in. So I'm so glad to be talking to you because, I've been following your work for a while. I read your newsletter, Thoughts for Thursday, which is great, which is full of so much of the information that I want to talk about in the podcast, really. Soft skills. You're a teacher and educator, fabulous musician, and doing a lot of cool stuff in the jazz world, especially the Stratford Jazz Jam as well, which is great. So congratulations with that, by the way.
Well, thank you very much,
So just tell me a little bit about how you got started, because, you've done some incredible things, been all over the world. And as I understand, you've always been self-employed as well, your entire life, which is great.
Well, I graduated in 2001 from Dartington College of Arts. It was basically an arts college on top of a hill in Devon full of hippies. And I had a great time there. But finishing that, coming kind of back to where I grew up, I suppose, I just sort of realized that if I was going to be a musician and be an artist and get work, then really I needed to pull my finger out a lot more. Mm-hmm. I realized, ironically, after doing 3 years on a university course, that I didn't really know very much. I think I just had too much of a good time outside of university.
Excellent, yeah.
So I was always playing in bands and doing other people's projects, but when it came to my own, I kind of shied away from that and just scraped through and just did the bare minimum in terms of the course content and put far more effort into other people's work when they were asking me to, play piano for this and saxophone for that. Afterwards, I came back and I got a teaching job from one of my old lecturers, actually. She just randomly asked me if I could come in and help her on this project.
No way.
And then that fell into a teaching job and I thought, wow, this is great in some respects. I was doing one lecture a week, I think,
wow, okay.
As well as signing on.
Yes.
And very quickly that started to become really serious. And I was, 21 and a college lecturer, and in some ways it felt cool, but it seemed like I was too young to be doing it. I knew the content musically and, theoretically I knew what I was talking about, but relating to the kids, I was one of them. So that sort of freaked me out in a way, and I sort of shied away from that. And I did continue with one-to-one tuition running groups and workshops and things, but I didn't want to become this sort of classic teacher stereotype. I also fell into a band at that point, which was just random luck.
Is this Dr. Teeth?
Dr. Teeth, yeah.
Nice.
And so that sort of started off very, very low key, and it kind of became quite popular, and we ended up getting signed to a label, and we went and did 2 tours of Chicago and the Midwest, and we went Spain, Norway, France, all over the place doing.
And this is just something you fell into almost, you know?
Yeah, just randomly in one of the rooms in Stratford College, the guy whose band it was just said, can you come and play these saxophone charts for me? So I did, with him playing piano, and he was like, yeah, do you want a gig on Saturday? Yeah, all right. Right, off we go. And that was it. I was the sax player in the band.
Epic.
I mean, we had some amazing times. So all my 20s were sort of filled with that, really, sort of doing a bit of teaching and just playing in this band and having a great time with that. But I'm sort of reaching like 2007, which is like a monumental year in my mind.
Well, as in like just a lot of stuff happened, or?
Yeah, so 2007 was almost like this sort of spiritual awakening moment, but unfortunately I had to sift through a lot of shit to get to this point. So it was a year that I went on holiday with my now wife, got engaged while we were in New Zealand. We went for this amazing holiday, and it was like the end of a magical year, really, where everything was sort of going right, and, you know, we'd sort of moved in together and popped the question, and it was all looking hunky-dory. And then coming back from that, everything started to go really wrong. My health, my mental health. Also, I realized that was all happening because of some trauma that was in the past that was starting to become really present. And then the following year, that became massively present, and it all went to crap, basically. It seems like this sort of really transitional moment where I was coasting and kind of numb to a lot of things, and then all of a sudden there were real problems, real highs as well. But rather than just sort of flatlining my response to pretty much everything and just being this laid-back guy, everything seemed to matter a lot more. I kind of went through a long period of time when it was trying to discover who I was and what I was doing and how to become successful as an artist, but also as a human being and a husband and a
there's so many
father,
angles, and the stakes are bigger.
And that's it. When it starts to mean so much more, all of a sudden I felt a lot of pressure. I've often worked with people that are way above me in terms of their talent level and their knowledge. And I remember you saying something about your reason for this podcast, you know, your experience of being one of the less experienced people and then having to really fight for that position.
Massively, yeah.
And that was definitely me. So many people knew stuff that was way beyond what I was capable of doing. But actually being at the bottom of the class, I think is quite a cool thing to...
Don't want to be the smartest person in the room.
No, I mean, you just work so much harder. So I got this work ethic from that where I started to really put in the practice and find these tactics, I suppose, of coping with all this stuff. You know, as people say about life moments, it was like all my life moments were in 1 or 2 years, basically. So it's really, really intense. I mean, it was a really, really scary time. And even thinking back to it, you know, I get that sense of...
you can still feel it almost.
that anxiety. But I almost sort of found this urge, I suppose, to make it more my own and really feeling those moments of discomfort. I try to put myself into those situations even more and try to push myself as an individual rather than just being the sax player in this band. Or
you wanted to do something for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And from that particular period came your album, right?
Exactly.
2017.
Yeah. So it was about a 10-year period, I suppose, which I guess I was struggling in some ways. But from that, I kind of realized that this is an opportunity. You know, I say it's like this awakening. So all my compositions on that album were celebrating that sort of polar opposite side of life, light and dark.
So staying on similar lines of pushing through discomfort, I know fear is a topic that you write about in your newsletter from time to time, and I'm wondering, what's your experience been, and if you have any strategies of, overcoming fear when it really tries to stop you in your tracks?
Something that I've always loved doing is going and doing gigs and live performance. And I'd never really suffered from nerves. And all of a sudden, the nerves kicked in a massive way. And it's not like, oh, I've got a few butterflies in my tummy. It's like, I'm going to pass out with fear. It's horrible. I found it really difficult to cope with. And sometimes I still do. Some random situations, I'll get nervous. I guess the one that really did it was like the really official concert setup where there's like a stage and all the lights shining on you and then an audience that you can't really see. Whereas all the sort of nightclub type gigs that I enjoyed, there's that hustle and bustle and people chatting and they are listening, but they're not really. But that sort of, that sort of official, quiet concert type setup, I used to really freak out about those situations.
So in terms of thinking about that time, how do you like come out of that and deal with that? Because I think that, I've definitely been in those sort of situations. You mentioned about the driving. I remember one of my earliest jobs in London where like I felt really, really ill. I had to stop the car and I was like nearly sick. And it's just because of the sort of the stress and the pressure of, oh my God, I can't believe I'm going to do this job and all the associated, be it anxiety or self-doubt or all the rest of it. For those people that are in currently a sort of experience like you had, have you got any sort of advice for how to come out of that situation and get up and play the music and, continue creating?
Yeah. Well, first of all, there was a guy called Dr. John Eaton who's done this reverse therapy course. This talks about head mind and body mind, and it seems like this really wacky thing, but I'm going to go with it.
Go for it, yeah.
So your head mind is like your logical brain. And this was the thing that I was really struggling with. It's like I'm feeling all this anxiety, I'm feeling depressed, I'm feeling nervous. And my logical brain is like, well, sort yourself out. There's nothing to be afraid of. But in your mind, you can't reason with it. It's like it's different. It's this different beast almost. So that was my head mind. And my head mind, I learned, was really powerful. It's like your rational thinking and your logical mind, which everyone thinks that you should have that and sort of embrace that. But actually your body mind is far more intuitive, definitely. And it knows what's good and bad for you. The anxiety thing comes from like this primal thing about being scared. And of course, nowadays, there's no reason to be scared of, a tiger coming to attack you at night, but you're still afraid of the dark, So the body mind has this sort of leftover primal quality to it. But actually in certain situations, if you listen to it, it can actually tell you what to do. And it's much more beneficial for you than this logical mind, which it tries to take over basically. So in certain situations, I would listen to my body mind and it's like, okay, this is scary for a reason and you should get out, abort. But most of the time it's scary, but deep down you think, actually, maybe I should just try and get through this because it's potentially worth it.
Honing that intuition.
Yeah.
It's so interesting because this is actually something now that several people I've interviewed on the show have said. Yeah. So it's so cool that you're saying the same. And have you got any methods for doing that? Because I noticed on the newsletter you've mentioned like breath work and meditation type stuff. Is that ever something you've tried or had any success with?
Yeah. So I mean, this is the great thing about the internet is that there's so many resources. Breathing techniques, yes. There's a few of those that I could perhaps run through. Is that helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So first of all, there's a guy called Wim Hof who's had some recent fame, I suppose. Although he's been doing it for a long time. So you could look up the Wim Hof method. The Wim Hof method's quite long, whereas these are perhaps potentially a bit shorter. Something called box breathing, where you breathe in for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, out for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds. So those are quite good breathing exercises. There's also this thing called tapping. Have you heard of tapping?
Yeah, yes.
So the tapping thing was Nick Ortner, I think, of the Tapping Solution, which is a great resource to use. And it's really easy as well. I mean, a lot of these things you'll look into and you think that's, a load of rubbish. But what you've got to lose.
Yeah. It's so interesting you mention all this because on a recent episode of the podcast, I've spoken to a transformational coach where she references both the breathing technique and the tapping as well.
Okay.
So it's so cool.
Another repeat.
No. But my point being that you're on the right lines. I mean, it's so interesting to see that you've found, value from these different techniques as well.
Yeah, that's the thing, it's out of necessity that you go and research these things and you'll find them.
Yeah, but I think it's great. And one of the things that's really exciting about the podcast is hearing people say those repetitive things, forming those patterns, because I'm starting to understand the things that are really valuable to people. And, if anyone is listening to this and they feel that they need to do some work in these particular areas and address them, then they know that these are some of the strategies that people have had success with and they might want to try out. So yeah, nice one. There's something interesting that just springs to mind because I think this is also something you've written about in your newsletter and definitely something that I've experienced. But from a physiological point of view, anxiety and excitement are very, very similar things, right?
Yeah.
And I found a tactic for me was to sort of trick myself by just saying, you're not feeling anxious about a situation, you're feeling excited.
I
what's your
totally go with
of
that. Yeah. That's the thing about, this sort of pre-awakening moment. It sounds really grandiose, but it does feel like that to me. Being numb to a lot of things, I didn't get depressed or down about things, but neither did I get really excited and wasn't enjoying life I think as much as I could have been. So yes, you get these feelings of low and stressed, but also you should embrace those feelings.
I think one of the things I've learned on this sort of self-awareness journey is trying to feel into those things. And also if something doesn't feel right, trying to sit and examine why. I'm quite keen on meditation, something I try and bring up as a topic on the podcast as often as is possible. And I do feel that it's a really excellent tool for just allowing you to do just that and sit with your thoughts, examine why you're feeling the way you're feeling. Moving on to a slightly more practical set of skills. Talk to me about learning, because you've learned several instruments to a very high level and you teach as well. And for me in school, they always went on about understanding your learning style, which I don't really think I've ever perfectly figured out to this day. I mean, I have my ways of figuring things out, but sometimes it does feel like a lot of effort. So in terms of learning for yourself, and also your experience as a teacher, have you got any thoughts or strategies around learning for creatives?
Yeah, so I do try and tailor what I do for my students, whether that's one-to-one or in a workshop. So there's that age-old thing of visual, auditory, kinesthetic. And I know that I take a lot of things in visually. When I think of music, you'd think you would hear the music, but a lot of the time I see the music.
It's really interesting.
And when you've got this way of learning, you can assume that everybody else is the same. So I try to force myself into these other areas of what does it feel like to play the music? Guitarists are really big on, muscle memory. I feel these shapes. I learn this pentatonic pattern. The shape of this chord, whatever it might be. So to think like a guitarist or to think like a drummer or to think like a singer I know one singer does it the same as I do. She actually visualizes the notes on kind of levels.
So cool.
And so she puts her hand up to pitch the note.
Yeah.
But other people, they just hear these sounds and they just recreate them. So putting yourself in that situation of not the way you would do things, I think is important as a teacher. And getting to know whether somebody gets it or not. This is where I think I've been lucky because a lot of the stuff is very individual and it's not in these massive day-to-day classes.
It's a different challenge,
30
isn't it?
Students or 30 plus students, where you've got to assess immediately whether they know what's going on. I'm in a different situation for that. But a lot of people, when you ask them, did you get that? Yeah. And they'll nod their head and that they don't get it. So you explain it a different way and then you explain it again. And often the repetition of it week after week, it's how can I put this again? And we'll attack it from another angle.
Yeah, that's it. It's about reframing it, as it were.
Yeah. We were talking earlier off
off
the
mic
about teaching styles and teachers. There was one teacher that said something to me that was really horrible. And I sort of understand why he did it, I think. Anyway, I'll tell you what it is.
Yeah, yeah.
So at university, I went along and I went from being quite a good musician, I thought, to somebody that knew nothing. Okay. Not because I forgot it all, but because of, out of one pond into a, bigger pond.
Ah, I see. Yes.
It's like, yeah. Being small town, and then there's a bigger space, and there's a lot more people that are better than you.
Yeah.
And he was trying to teach me the piano, and he also ran the jazz band that I was joining at that time. And so he said, look, I've heard you play piano, I've heard you play saxophone, and to be honest, you're no good at either of them.
Wow.
Which is like a really harsh thing to say.
That's pretty savage, yeah.
Yeah, savage. So I think he was trying to do that to motivate me because I wasn't turning up to all of his lessons. I wasn't practicing. And
some whiplash type
yeah,
instructor,
I think he was like, come on, you need to pull your finger out. But the effect was completely the opposite.
Yeah.
I basically said, fuck you, and completely reacted and rebelled against it. So I didn't turn up to any of his lessons then. And I spent about 2 years avoiding any contact with him. And finally sort of swallowed my pride a little bit and joined in for the last year. Just, again, to scrape through and get my marks. But I've never put any of my students in that situation when I did it. I guess I put a positive spin on a lot of things and probably overly positive sometimes, which annoys people. But I think that sort of positive reinforcement is much more powerful than that sort of short, harsh, cutting remark.
Yeah, massive.
And I think he wanted to motivate me by doing that. But the reaction was completely the opposite.
Yeah. Well, again, like we discussed off mic, there is another podcast episode with this transformational coach where we talk a lot about the source of a lot of people's trauma, are either, parent related or more often than not, teacher related.
Yeah.
And I think also it would just be quite interesting that, if anyone is listening that's in the leadership space or is a boss or has staff or anything like that, that it's really important that we reframe how we deal with certain situations, because I think that whole generation of like tough love and being harsh on people, like we're starting to see now that it's not quite serving us, and people are speaking up against that. And it's just such a shame. I mean, again, we were talking about this, like people paying for therapy to like undo something that like a teacher's done. It almost like makes me angry, I mean, it's unfortunate. We know
that masculinity thing as well. Of manning up, that's I don't say that I've got two boys and I don't say that to them. There are times when I say, come on, get up, if they're falling over, right? But I don't say man up, I don't say grow up. I think it's important to
see them as individuals.
To be individuals and humans. And then, like yesterday, for example, my son got really upset about something, and I said, look, it's fine, you can be upset. Sometimes we need to be upset.
Yeah.
But then after that, what should you do? And you kind of learnt from that, like, okay, well, he's only 10, so he had a bit of a cry, and then afterwards he got on with it, and he did what he was supposed to be doing, and he felt really good about it.
It's so interesting that, like when we talk about children and you say he has a cry, like it's so interesting that as we go into adult behavior, and I've got a friend who talks a lot about comparing the sort of studied behavior of early sort of hunter-gatherer humans and the weird and wonderful things they would do as trauma release, and when you look at animals and things, but children cry. Do you know what I mean? And probably one of the biggest problems with adults, especially among males, I'm stereotyping, it might be slightly more acceptable for women to cry than men, or certainly like even now I know that I could, but I wouldn't. I'd feel uncomfortable, and that's just from my upbringing, my experience. Again, you talk about your son, he's letting that out. That's a form of release. When we talk about sitting with the emotion, well, that's great, isn't it?
Those are the things that I learn from my kids all the time. It's like they cry when they're upset and they play. Yeah. And those two things I try and lock onto, and I try and do that when I'm as an adult.
Yeah. Play is one of those things that I don't think I do enough of. Play's great, firstly as a learning tool, but it also puts you in that flow state where you're focused, creative, time passes, and it's almost like a meditation kind of thing.
Actually, so learning tactics, that's one of the things I try and give to my students, is that you should break up your practice time into play and then also some form of training. Again, tailored to the individual, but most of the time the training bit first, So I always think of like PE lessons at school where you practice passing for half an hour and then at the end you have a game, and that's the fun bit. But you're trying to implement those passes into the game at the end. So I say, well, okay, well, these are some scales, whatever it might be, some training element. A lot of people kind of associate these tasks with being dull or not imaginative or original or creative. But actually, you should disassociate any sort of emotion from them and try to do those as an exercise and just almost like a meditation. So if I'm playing scales up and down or chords or, whatever it might be, I get into this almost
flow state,
of just practicing the technique side of things. And then as a reward afterwards, then you can go into that play and do what you usually like doing. Normally it's putting a backing track on and just ripping it up.
That's cool though, because you've got the exercise, but you've also got the context. Because when I think back to school, there's one particular teacher of mine that would always say that you don't need to know why you're doing it, you just need to do it. But for me...
Oh man, that's like the worst.
It's so interesting because I took that on as, okay, well, there's something wrong with me, but I can't actually learn something unless I know the why behind it, unless I have the context.
So that's
I just don't understand.
That's another thing that I make sure I do is explain the reasons. I mean, everyone knows that musical scales there's a benefit to doing them. I personally hate doing them, and because of that, I end up saying to students, okay, well, this is one way you can do it. This is the classic way of doing it. And then this is another way of doing it, which normally involves some sort of play and a little bit of creativity and some originality that they can put into it. But also I explained that this is why playing scales is of benefit. If I was told to do something with no explanation of why, then I wouldn't do it.
Yeah. So one of the topics I discuss on the podcast is failure. And I think when you're starting out, there is always this dreaded fear of failure that, you're going to work on a project and it's got to be a success. And I think often that those failures are quite personal, because I think in the beginning for a lot of creatives, it's very easy to get your sort of self-worth wrapped up in actually the work that you're making. So just with that in mind, I'm just interested to know, what are your takes? And can you think of any failures that have ultimately led to success or been a learning experience?
Yeah, see, I've never really thought of them as failures. They've always been stepping stones to
learning
something
experiences
else.
or something. Yeah.
I mean, I guess when you put stuff out there, like I've got recorded music out there and I listen back to it. In fact, I don't listen back to it because I find it really difficult. At the time, I'm happy with it enough. As I said, I'm not a perfectionist. And I think if I was, then nothing would ever happen. My problem is that I'll probably rush something out a little bit just because I go the other way of okay, I'm not completely happy with it, but I'm just going to put it out there anyway. So I'm always having to find this balance of, not procrastinating too much, but not rushing a shitty job, basically. So just putting stuff out there, I think is, first of all, it's quite brave to do that, but it's also essential. So you kind of get used to doing it. And it's not like what you did was a failure, because at the time you were trying your hardest and that was you, and that's a snapshot of what you were like at that moment. But I always look back to or listen back to recordings and it's okay, well, that was all right. But I'm so much further ahead now. And I hope that, in 10 years' time, I'll listen to something that I've recorded now and think, okay, well, that was pretty amateurish in terms of what I could do now. It's the progression is constant. I'm learning things all the time. So
just listening to what you say there, it's good to document your work because you can see those progression points. Do you know what I mean? So you should record your music. You should share it. And
I think a lot of the things particularly in the jazz world, I feel like I've fallen into the jazz world. There are people that have their opinions about jazz, the jazz.
Quite a few.
yeah. But for me, I like the improvisational aspect to it. That's how I approach it. But a lot of the time when I watch performances, I'm a promoter as well for a jazz club. I have a jazz club. Well, first of all, there's this sense of skill level in terms of the player. So X-player can play really fast. They can play 300 beats per minute, Charlie Parker's Donnelly or whatever. And that's impressive. But I've also heard some performances like that, which technically are impressive, but it lacks something. Mm-hmm. So when I listen back to some of my own performances, I'll try and think, well, I did have some emotion in that. Mm. And as long as you're putting stuff out there that has some emotion and some
uniqueness to it.
Yeah, and some integrity to it. If it has an energy to it, it doesn't really matter if it's really slick or recorded, mastered, spending thousands of pounds on it. As long as it's got energy to it, then I'll appreciate it. And that goes for art of any sort. If people are really going for it, I love it.
Yeah, so true. So tell me a little bit about how you rest and recharge. I know, again, this is occasionally a topic that appears on your thoughts for Thursday. Thinking about family and children and things now, I mean, has that become more important now as you get older, would you say?
Well, yeah, definitely. One of those wake-up moments was, I am now a husband and a dad. And I think I put a lot of effort into that. Mm-hmm. My wife may disagree, but I'm probably more fired up about becoming a good dad than being a good, successful artist, actually.
Interesting, yeah.
So loads and loads of time I dedicate to family. And I think it would be selfish of me to go completely into the musical world. And I mean, yeah, it'd be great to release another album and then get some success and then some touring and all that sort of stuff. I'd love to do that, but it would be selfish as well.
Yeah, so, it makes sense. Yeah.
At this stage in my life, it's like that. This is where my priority is, family. And, my wife is a professional horse rider and she's getting some success now, which is great. So I'm actually really pleased that she's having that moment.
Amazing.
And I'm dedicating time to my kids, and I think that's important because another 10 years and, they'll be doing their own thing, and I'd want them to be doing their own thing.
But I think it's really cool because what you've done at the moment is you're building your work around your life in a way, in a very conscious way that supports the lifestyle that you want to have, which is not necessarily like releasing a new album for the sake of doing it because that's what everyone else is doing.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I'm going to set up the jazz club and keep that going and all these other things, which I just think is great. And a part of why I'm mentioning this is really almost as advice for people as well. Don't necessarily follow the crowd. Part of this whole thing, if you're going to become self-employed or run your own business or whatever, is that you can build the business around the lifestyle that you want to have.
Yeah, it can be based on anything that you're into. For me, it's like family, small village community. It's I get a lot out of that. So that's my like rest time is
immersing yourself in that.
Yeah, which seems really quaint and a bit cheesy, but that's what I like doing. So
yeah, I love it. So I want to talk a little bit about comfort zone. And when I think of my own experience of my comfort zone, it's almost like if I draw a circle around me and I see that the comfort zone's either expanding or contracting. It very rarely stays still. So it's either contracting when I'm not doing enough, or I'm expanding it by going out there and pushing myself. So yeah, I'm just really interested to get your thoughts on like how you expand your comfort zone.
So, as I said earlier, when things matter more to me, I get more nervous about it.
Yeah.
And something I've struggled with. And also, I'm confident day to day, but slightly introverted, perhaps even massively introverted. But what I've learned about that is that that's not a bad thing.
No, not at all. Yeah.
There are some very famous leaders that are introverts, and that's fine. I do definitely push my comfort zone because you need to know where those boundaries are. And in order for something to grow, you need to push a little bit past it each time. And I say that about music, fitness stuff as well. If you're going to run down the street and, you get out of breath in 100 yards, or the next time you do 200 yards and, you build your fitness like that. Well, it's the same with music. You can do it one speed and now you do it a little bit quicker or So you push beyond those boundaries, and I think finding those boundaries is really important as an artist, and then just pushing a little bit beyond them. If you try and go too much, it's counterproductive. I think.
That's also a really valuable thing to mention. Yeah.
So there are some things that I try to do to give the impression of confidence, I suppose. First of all, I try and act braver than I am. So you put on this facade that, you are laid back and you are confident. And whereas inside you can be whatever you want. You can be an absolute mess inside. But if you put on this display, then you feel like you're winning them over, perhaps. And there are certain situations that I've found myself in now, like when it's been more about me as an individual artist, then there's more pressure on me to do things myself. So I have to introduce things, I have to talk in front of people, which I don't particularly like. But I found that putting on this facade of confidence is very helpful. And also just talking to them like people and friends, actually. I think that's something that I've done more and more. You sort of choose particular people in the audience, and if you can't see them, then you just make it up in your head of like, these are actual people out there, and you can talk to them like human beings and like your friends, and people love that. I go and watch gigs, and when it's personal, when it's conveyed in that way, I really associate with it, and I enjoy the performance more for that sort of interaction. So I know that that's important. I try and do that with my performances.
So Jay, just tell me one thing that matters and one thing that doesn't matter.
I think music with energy is the stuff that I like to listen to, and that's not specific to genre. So I always think about, when I'm performing, how can I put in more energy? I'm not a very obvious performer, I suppose, in that I don't go crazy on stage. I mean, there are examples when that music, but there's a moment, and I'm getting into it, or I'm putting it on, actually, and I try and put in loads of energy. First of all, if you don't do it, then you're not doing anyone any justice for that. But if you only half do it, you look crap. So you have to do it absolutely.
You have to be committed, all in.
Yeah, absolutely commit to it, and try not to let the crippling self-doubt come in, and just this is the moment. That on stage it looks different. The other thing actually that's that I learned from seeing video back is that when I was doing all these little dance moves and stuff, I don't do a lot of that, by the way, but that's what I'm talking about, sort of moving on stage. When you're doing it in your head, you think you're doing it a lot. On video, you're not moving at all. And one of the biggest things I've learned, actually, is from a trumpet player that I used to work with, actually, who was like, everything you do when you play into a microphone, you've got to do it, to the nth degree, because everything will be highlighted. So if you breathe, you've all got to be in sync, and you've got to really kind of snap that breath off and kind of leave that silence. If you're going to articulate a note, it's got to be massive, because through the microphone it doesn't give that effect. So there's a difference between playing through a microphone and playing acoustically,
live.
So I kind of take that idea and I put it into what I look like on stage. So when I'm moving about, I try and make it, okay, in my mind I think I'm doing it a little bit, but actually let's make those movements.
It's not an accident.
It's like you've got to be a cartoon of yourself to make all of those mannerisms over the top.
All the introverts have stopped listening at this point. They're like, no way. But
I know
it's
hard to do. But you think about what you like seeing when you go and watch a performance.
You want that energy.
There's a certain sort of romantic idea, like Pink Floyd when they used to. When they just started out, they had all the lights out.
It's an experience.
Miles Davis turning his back to the audience. Van Morrison does that as well. It's a sort of romantic idea, but I think most of the time, I like people being on stage and jumping around and having a good time, and
performance.
And perform it and make it more of a show than just a recorded music example.
So if energy matters, what doesn't matter?
I guess other people's idea of success. I think you can choose what success is. For me, as I said before, it'd be nice if everything took off and I was busier and doing bigger gigs and, more streams but actually I'm in a situation where I get loads of time with my family. I get to perform apart from during this lockdown. I get to do all the things that I want to do. So I feel like I'm successful for that. I've got enough coming in to kind of keep things ticking over, and I can choose what I want to do at any point. So there's a freedom in that, which I guess is my success.
Yeah, that's like literally one of the best answers I've had to that question. So thank you, Jay. That's amazing. So Jay, where can people find you online? And you're also running this jazz club as well. So just tell us a little bit about where people can reach out to you.
jrileymusic.com. I haven't updated that for a while, but it kind of says what I do. Stratford Jazz Club, stratfordjazz.org.uk.
So just tell people a little bit about what that is. So that's a live open mic sort of setting jazz club. I'll let you describe it because I'm just going to not do justice.
Yeah, so it's a UK jazz club, it's a small town jazz club, but it's got big ideas, I suppose.
And you've had some big talent come through.
Oh, massively, well. Yeah. There's some of the top UK jazz artists come and play there, and they enjoy it. And we've got some people from the States coming over. We've had some big names and some international artists play at the club. And that's been going since 1986.
Nice.
And I've been doing it for about 5 or 6 years. So that's a really cool thing as a sort of side project. Upton Blues Festival. I run an education program for that festival, which has won the best blues festival of the country. Yeah. A couple of times in a row.
It's a really good festival. I remember
it's amazing. Yeah.
It's really cool.
So we go into schools and we run these blues workshops to kind of give the background of what blues is and how it's relevant in today's music, which I think a lot of the kids enjoy. And they get a chance to perform at the festival as well.
In addition to this, you've also released an album, which is for sale now, right?
Yeah, so that was 2017. That's called Light from Dawn. You can find it where you normally find music.
Amazing. Jay Riley, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
No, it's been great. Thank you very much.
So guys, I really hope you've enjoyed this episode of the podcast. If you're not already, follow us on Instagram and Facebook at The Creative Venture. And we're going to finish off with one of Jay's tracks called Smiles from his debut album, Light from Dawn.